In my quest, per se, to learn about incentives and how they shape our behavior, I've been thinking a lot about fear lately. And not just the obvious kind, where a tiger pounces on you and like you're afraid you're gonna die, but the quieter version of it. The kind that shows up in the small decisions. The things that we don't do. The things that we put off. The things that we almost do and then don't. The more I've thought about it, the more I've read, the more that I've realized that maybe fear is something else. We tend to think of fear as a feeling, as an emotion, something that just happens to us. But that doesn't really explain how much influence that it actually has. Because fear doesn't just show up in those big moments. It shapes what you pay attention to. It shapes what you remember, how you act, what you avoid. And most of the time, these are the things that are going undetected. So instead of thinking about fear as just a feeling, just as an emotion, I want to discuss it in a different light. Not as something that you experience, but as something that's constantly influencing your behavior, as an incentive system. Something that quietly pushes you in certain directions and pulls you away from others. Once you start looking at it that way, a lot of things start to make more sense. And not just why we react to the obvious danger, the tiger, but why we avoid things that might actually be good for us. Why certain experiences stick with us and others don't. And why fear can be incredibly useful in some situations and strangely limiting in other situations. So that's what I want to get into today. What fear actually is, what it actually does, and how it ends up shaping a lot more of our lives than we give it credit for. So let's get started. What is fear, right? First of all, I've got a little bit of, oh, it's over here. I got a little bit of black eye action going on. I'm just going to get out and chill. But I'm just saying, when you're seeing I'm not dead, I'm not sleepy, I just got a little bit of a black eye action going. But what is fear? Well, as an obvious noun definition, we all know fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is likely to cause pain or threat. We can all identify. We're like, yeah, that's fear. You can identify it as a verb, to be afraid of something, as likely to be dangerous, painful, or threatening. Sure. And psychologists call it a protective primal emotion that evokes a biochemical and emotional response. And, these definitions are great. They're fantastic. Psychologists came up with these definitions. And I'm by no means smarter than a psychologist in this field. However, I think that there are different lenses that you can look at it. And the lens that I'm looking at it, these definitions don't work super well with me. But I found one that does, and it's under Ralph Adolph, who is a professor of neuroscience, psychology, and biology. And his definition is that fear is not defined as an emotion. It is rather defined as a functional state of an organism, defined by what it does, rather than what it feels like. And so his definition is this, that fear is a biochemical and motivational system which can produce emotions like fear, but are not limited to them. It is a system. It's not identified with the conscious feeling of being afraid, nor with the behaviors that come with that, such as screaming and running away. Maybe you freeze, maybe you fight. But these can be evidence of the functional state. But he views it as a functional state, as a central state, which means that fear is a whole body mode, and that mode is controlled by the organism's central nervous system. Fear, it's a coordinated internal state that changes how the brain, how the body, and perception all operate at once. So, as an easy example, think of your brain like a command center with different modes that it can switch into. Kind of like a car switching between modes. If you buy a nice brand new Ferrari, it's got a bunch of different modes. It'll have normal mode, it'll have safety mode, it'll have sport mode, traction mode, drag mode, depending on, who you let drive your new $1 million car. If your son is taking your new Ferrari to prom, you're probably going to say, let's put it in eco mode. Let's take it easy. Let's not try to impress anybody. right? Because you don't want them totaling it. But then you go out with your buddies and you want to show off a little bit, let's put it in drag mode. And I like that example because it shows, like, you change the mode and all of the responses change as well. So it's central. Fear is central because it involves several subsystems at once. Your heart rate, your hormones, your attention, your memory. It influences how you feel and how you act, and it comes from the center. It comes from your central nervous system, which causes these fear behaviors. So fear is not a feeling. It is a mode. And while you're in that mode, your behavior changes. The mode changes your behavior. How you focus, how you remember, and how you act. So within fear, are there submodes, or is it one thing? Right? And scientists don't all agree on this. Some say that maybe it's 2 subsystems. Fear versus panic. Some say maybe it's 3. Fear, anxiety, panic. And some say it's just one system, and that the system is called the survival circuits. Now, broad evidence suggests that there are indeed subsystems of fear, and you probably experience these. Well, you definitely experience these. I do. We all do. And that there's 3 of them. These being anxiety, fear, and panic. And anxiety is the pre-encounter defense. This is the threat is uncertain. It's far away. You're not scared yet, but you're prepping. It's like you're not even walking in the woods yet. You're gonna go on a hike in the woods and you heard that there might be tigers in the woods. So you're scared that you might see a tiger when you get in the woods. You're anxious. That's the anxiety. The threat, rather, is far away, and it's not in sight yet, but you're still prepping to be scared. Fear is the second one, which is the post-encounter defense. You detect the threat, but it has not pounced yet. The system is gathering information. It's planning. So fear is like you've actually made it to the woods. You're walking through the woods, and you see the tiger. It's not clawing the ground, ready to pounce on you. It's not, stretching out its neck. It's not going to pounce yet. It's just looking at you. So you see it. It's not a threat yet, but now you're in fear. And the last one is panic. This is the circa strike defense. This is you're currently fighting. You're fighting the threat. You're fighting the tiger. The threat is immediate. It's unavoidable. So even though these forms look different, they still belong to the same one functional system, the central state that Ralph Adolph defined it as. But it changes when how far away the threat is on the timeline. Sorry. Anxiety, the threat is far away. Fear, the threat is close. And panic, the threat is now. So these are all part of the same functional system, the central state. But they are split up and defined by how far away the threat is on the timeline. Now note, I understand it might be confusing because fear is the name of the system, it's the name of the mode, the central state, but it's also the name of one of the subsystems. I just said that fear might be split up between 3, anxiety, fear, and panic. Now I didn't like this at the beginning. I thought that maybe he was contradicting his point, because he's using the word fear in his definition. But it turns out that there just simply isn't another word to describe this subsystem, fear. I mean, that's the best word to do it. So, in redefining it, he used the word again. It was a little bit confusing, but hopefully it actually makes sense. So fear's not an emotion. It's not a feeling. It's a central state. And that central state changes your behavior. Ralph then raises an important question, which is, are we discovering fear through, objective scientific investigation, or are we inputting it through our concept of fear? This is actually a pretty big debate, believe it or not. And Ralph's argument is, of course, that fear is not a feeling, it's not a cultural idea, we're not inputting it, rather it is a functional state that's built into every single animal in nature, on Earth at least. I could go on a tangent about how we can't actually accurately assume that aliens experience fear the same way that we do, because they're a part of a different cultural regime, they're not functionally homologous with us. Which is interesting, but it's irrelevant to the situation. But so it's only cooked into every single animal on Earth at least, because of, Earth developed on fear. Fear developed on Earth, sorry, because of we all experience the same threats, the predators, environmental changes, injury, starvation, territorial conflict, these sorts of things. It's a different rabbit hole. But, so fear is not a feeling, it's not a cultural idea. It's a functional state and it's cooked into all of us. Well, what does it do? Right? That's what fear is. What does fear do? Well, what fear does, its function, according to scientists, is to link stimuli with behavior. Stimuli being the things in the environment that your senses pick up on. A shadow, a loud bang, a small creak, an angry face, a threat cue, anything. Behavior being what you do in response. You freeze, you cry, you hide, you run, you fight. All these are the different behaviors. So fear's job is to link those two together. And fear exists because it works. I have this idea called incentive Darwinism, which sounds pretty badass. And all it means is that the most powerful and the most successful incentive is the one which is the most influential over a population. Over a population, the incentive which acts the most successfully, the one that works on a broad scale, is the one that wins. And in this case, fear is really, really good at this. The most powerful incentive is the one that shapes the behavior the most. Fear shapes our behavior quite a bit. It's really, really good at this. Fear rewards avoidance. It punishes reckless behavior. It motivates caution. It distorts your memory. It biases your attention towards danger. I mean, there's some cool studies about pregnant women forgetting how terrible birth was and how pregnancy was. Not in all cases. There's studies that refute it. But there's some really cool studies about how women's memory going through pregnancy and giving birth change post. Because if you think about it, pregnancy is a really tough thing. It's really difficult. It's really painful in a lot of scenarios. Grueling. And so after the process, if you decide, wow, that sucked, I'm not going to have any more kids, nature, doesn't want that. It doesn't make biological sense to do that. So your memory gets distorted in a lot of these scenarios. And women report this months after, forgetting how bad that was and saying, no, let's go again. So in all organisms, the purpose of fear is to promote survival. Over the course of evolution, specifically human, the people who feared the right things survived to pass on their genes. We learned about this in school. In doing this, the trait of fear and the responses to it were selected as beneficial to the race. So if fear is effective, and it's shaping our behavior this consistently across every organism, then the next question is, how does it work? Of course. Well, how does it work? Well, fear doesn't create new behaviors or systems. Instead, what it does is it actually hijacks systems that are already operating, and it repurposes them for survival. Specifically, this happens in the amygdala. So what does the amygdala do? Well, the amygdala's job is that it's constantly evaluating sensory input, and it's basically deciding if it's significant for biology. It's constantly checking what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling, what you're tasting, and if that matters for survival. So before fear kicks in, the amygdala is collecting data. It is comparing incoming data to past experiences. Have I seen this before? Did this hurt me? Does this look like something that hurt me? Is it similar? What should I remember or learn from this? That's what the amygdala is doing. It's always happening, even when you're calm. Right now, it's happening to me. It's happening to all of us. That's what the amygdala is doing. So when the amygdala detects a threat, it initiates the fear hijack. And this hijack lowers the amygdala's tolerance for threat relevance. Small things are now big. Ambiguous threats are now immediate danger. Things like a shadow becomes now maybe that's a person. Or, a random sound becomes maybe that's a threat. Uncertainty becomes suspicious. So if the amygdala had knobs, fear mode narrows the focus and turns certain knobs all the way up. You're not seeing more, you're seeing more selectively. And this is why fear can feel like tunnel vision. I'm sure we've all experienced this. This matters because false negatives are much more punishing than false positives. Missing something dangerous is worse than missing everything else. Because if you miss something dangerous and you die, well, nothing matters anymore. So it's better to have a false negative than a false positive. Oh my god, I think there's a tiger over there, I'm going to run. And then you find out it wasn't a tiger, it was a rabbit. And the rabbit was just going to come give you a kiss. But it's better to be false there than, well, it's better to be, false negative than think, oh, that's not a tiger, and it is, and you die. So that's why details disappear. Time is distorted. Eyewitness testimony isn't accurate. There's been a lot of studies about this. And so, if you're interested in that, you can go elsewhere, because I'm trying to stay on topic here. I'm already all over the place. But eyewitness testimony, there's a lot of studies that show eyewitness testimony is just not accurate, because post-fear, your memories are distorted. There's people who swear on oath that they're telling the truth, and they are certain that they're telling the truth. That man right there, I see his face. He's the one that killed my wife. And in a lot of cases, eyewitness testimony can't be an accurate, piece of testimony, because your memory changes post-fear. It's very interesting. Well, how does memory change post-fear? See, let's transition there. The amygdala doesn't store memories itself. Rather, what it does is it modulates how other parts of the brain store their memories. Specifically during emotional arousal, and even more specifically, fear. And I want to take just a second to re-anchor this, that fear is an incentive system. It's not optimized for truth. It's not optimized for valor. It's optimized for function. If it works, if it does its job, it wins. And its job is to keep you alive. In times prior, it has been to keep you alive. So, fear does things that aren't necessarily truthful. It optimizes and amplifies memories that encourage avoidance where it is needed. And it softens memories where avoidance would be costly. It's not moral, it's mechanical. And so fear can change memories in two different ways. To get back to the topic. Fear strengthens memories for bad things and makes them feel worse over time. And fear can soften memories of things that were scary but were good. So the first one. Fear strengthens memories for bad things and makes them worse over time. In this, the threat is exaggerated. It generalizes the threats easily. Memories resist correction. Back to the idea that a false positive is much better than a false negative. If it's right, you survive. That's the incentive logic. That's what it lives by. So, fear in these scenarios overlearns. It overgeneralizes. It prefers those false positives. And as a result, this explains things like social anxiety, fear holding people back, avoiding scary things. Sometimes fear doesn't ask whether a situation is actually dangerous. It asks whether avoiding it is safer than risking being wrong. And I think a lot of us experience this. The second one. Fear softens memories of things that were scary but were good. I talked about this a little bit earlier. Some experiences are scary. They're exhausting. They're painful. They're hard. But they're beneficial or they're necessary. Things like childbirth, which I mentioned. Intense training. Trying something new. Public speaking that went, decent. Heartbreak that led to growth. If fear encoded childbirth memories with full pain intensity, then avoidance would increase and reproduction would decrease. Bad. If fear encoded growth experiences as pure threat, then growth, learning, and exploration would stop. Bad. So instead, the memories of childbirth pain soften over time. The memories of, pain of leg day, if you haven't done a leg day in 2 weeks, softens. Maybe you have a little bit of motivation in the morning, you're like, hell yeah, let's do a leg day. And then you get in there and you're like, whoa, I did not remember how bad this sucked. It changes your memory of these experiences if they're good for you, in some cases. Of course, there's cases where that doesn't happen. But fear memory is not designed to maximize accuracy. It's rather designed to regulate behavior in the future. Just like incentives. That's what incentives do. They shape your behavior. They regulate your behavior in the future. Fear is an incentive system. And this is why fear is a double-edged sword. Because it's incredibly good at teaching us what not to do, what could hurt us, what could kill us. But it is much, much, much worse at teaching us what we should do anyways, even though we're scared and it's hard. This explains things like procrastination, avoiding opportunities, staying in your lane. Fear is very, very convincing, but it's not always correct. And so, you could say there's some potential here where, like, AI is getting better and better at a scale that is unprecedented. And, I don't know it. There's experts out there. But one could make the pitch that maybe AI will come in and realize that us humans are inherently flawed. That we have systems such as fear that are actually holding us back psychologically, biologically. Holding us back from our potential and just be like, whoa. And like take over, who knows. But these systems are not perfectly aligned. We always praise the human body and the human brain because it's brilliant. It's an amazing thing. But we've evolved so quickly technologically that our brain and our systems cannot keep up. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But fear protects us from embarrassment. It protects us from injury. It protects us from rejection. It does not protect us from inaction, missed opportunity, laziness. Now, what I'm not saying is that fear is bad, that fear is irrational, fear should be ignored. What I am saying is that fear is powerful, that fear is persuasive, that fear is an incentive which is shaping your behavior, that fear should be interpreted, not obeyed. Now, what is fear like in the modern landscape? A lot of these examples I've been explaining, I've been talking about it in the form of a tiger in the woods. How fear evolved in all animals on this planet, at least. Again, we can't say aliens have it. Well, fear evolved to respond to concrete, real, immediate threats. Modern life, however, is filled with more abstract conflicts, social threats, online outrage, financial struggles, things that people have never had to deal with. The same type of circuitry is trying to respond to these modern conflicts the same way that it did with the ancient conflicts. And you would think that we'd be able to kick back, enjoy life in this post-fear safe era. But that isn't the case. Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson has an opinion that we have progressed too quickly for our own good. He says, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and God-like technology. That kind of explains the point that I was just saying. The problem is, the amygdala doesn't know the difference between a predator and a potential tank in your reputation at work. All it knows is uncertainty and potential loss. Life is full of uncertainty and potential loss. That's why we're so chronically anxious all the time. This fear is responding to these things now like it did then. Uncertainty, jobs, money, what's going to happen in your future, social evaluation, what people think of you, ambiguity, texts, emails, tone, constant information all the time, news, feeds, opinions, social media. These aren't physical threats, but they share the same features that the brain evolved to treat as dangerous. Fear doesn't check if something's true, it checks if it could be true. The chances that you're going to die while giving a public speech, they're not zero, but they're very low. Much higher if you're a politician. But for me and you, if you were asked to give a small little TED talk in front of your class, or in front of your high school, you're probably not going to die. We can say with almost certainty you're not going to die. But we're terrified of it. Why? Because the amygdala, our fear system, sees uncertainty and potential loss. You might be ostracized. These little kids might laugh at you. They're little assholes. You might be embarrassed at work when you give a presentation and, nobody likes your idea. And so, I guess this is what people mean when they say all fear goes back to death. I've never really understood that. Because all fear doesn't go back to death. I'm not going to die. I'm scared of this, but I'm not scared of dying in this scenario. That's not even in the equation, but it is. Because your brain, your fear systems, evolved to protect you from death. To regulate your behavior in the future, to keep you alive. Natural selection. So, when it's responding to these scenarios nowadays, giving a TED Talk, it's responding to it the same way it would if you were an immediate threat of death. And I guess that's why fear always goes back to death. Is because that's what it's trying to do, even when it's not in the equation. I probably did a very poor job of explaining that. But it doesn't check if it's true. It checks if it could be true. And that explains social anxiety, anxiety spirals, overthinking, hesitation, avoidance. Because maybe is enough. So, it changes your attention. Fear pulls attention towards the potential problems. You start scanning for confirmation. That's why, if you are always talking about how upset you are and how bad your life is and how much you hate your job, you're going to be seeing a lot more of that. There's some studies there that, of course, therapy helps people. I think if you're struggling, you should go to therapy. But there are also some studies that say, meeting up with your girlfriends and talking about how much you hate your life, and they're all talking about how much they hate their life and how their boyfriends are terrible, then you have confirmation bias. You start to see those things more often. It changes what you put your attention towards. It changes your memory, how you remember past negative outcomes more vividly. And, you predict similar outcomes in the future. It changes your behavior. You start to hesitate. You start to avoid. You start to delay. The same system that once helped us avoid predators is now constantly nudging us away from uncertainty, even when that uncertainty contains opportunity. Things like not sending a message because it might be awkward. Not starting something because what if it fails? Overanalyzing a conversation you just had. We've all done this. You have a conversation and you're walking to your car and you're replaying every single thing you said and what they said and their facial expressions. What should I have done differently? Avoiding something that you actually want to do. Nothing here's life-threatening, but the system responding to it doesn't know that. All it sees is, again, uncertainty and potential loss. And again, that's why people say that fear all goes back to death. Death. I never used to understand it, but it makes sense. So if fear is constantly influencing us in ways that aren't always aligned with our goals, how do we relate to it? Fear is one of the most powerful incentive systems in the brain. It's one of the most effective things at influencing our behavior. And it doesn't require real danger to work. It only requires something that feels plausible. In modern life, we're surrounded by uncertainty, ambiguity, the social evaluation, all of which mimic the conditions fear evolved to respond to. As a result, the same system that once helped us survive is now constantly influencing what we pay attention to, what we remember, and what we choose to avoid. Not because those things are necessarily dangerous, but because they might be. And now again, what I'm not saying is that fear is bad. But what I am saying is that fear is not, honorable. It's not trying to be truthful. It's a system that our brain evolved to develop. And it's worked very, very good. It's done its job very, very successfully. But now, in the modern life, in this post-fear era, you could say, that's not to say we're not scared anymore, but prospectively, it needs to be interpreted rather than obeyed. So we have to start looking at our fear, me included, everybody, looking at it through the lens that this is an incentive. This is trying to shape our behavior in the future. And sometimes we should let it. If you stand on the edge of a bridge and you get really scared, you're like, well, I don't want to listen to that. Maybe don't stand on the edge of the bridge next time. Learn from that behavior. But if you're offered an opportunity for growth and you're nervous about it, we all experience this. And you notice that you're scared, think about it. Say, this is an incentive. It's trying to shape my behavior in the future. Why am I scared? What am I scared of? And when you realize that what you're scared of is uncertainty and potential loss, you have to look at the potential loss and realize, I'm kind of scared of nothing. If I give this speech at work and, it doesn't go well, I probably learned from it. And I'll come in a week and no one will be talking about it anymore because Johnny fucked his speech up too. We have to start interpreting this. I think it's fascinating, I really do. It's because these fears never pounce on us like they used to that we're always chronically anxious. But that's it. That's all I've got. Hope you enjoyed. See you guys next time.